A Popeyes franchisee just went bankrupt, owing more than $342 million. 39 restaurants closed for good in Florida and Georgia alone. And 2 weeks before those doors shut, Popeyes' own parent company stood in front of Wall Street and admitted the chain has now posted sales declines in 7 of the last 8 quarters. That's the setup. Here's the twist nobody saw coming. In that same earnings call, the exact same struggling chicken chain quietly announced the most aggressive expansion plan in its history, a permanent menu war against McDonald's, and a pricing move that's rewriting what value means in fast food. This isn't a comeback story yet. It's not a collapse story either. It's something messier, and honestly more interesting than either one. Let's start with the number that explains everything. In the second quarter of 2026, Popeyes' U.S. same-store sales fell 5.2%. That sounds bad on its own, and it is. But 3 months earlier, in the first quarter, that same number was 6.5%, the steepest quarterly drop the chain has posted in years. So the decline didn't stop. It slowed down. And in an industry where momentum is everything, slowing down a losing streak is currently the best news Popeyes has had in over a year. Now zoom out one level, because the number that actually explains the whole company isn't the 5.2%. It's what that decline is doing to a business that is otherwise firing on almost every cylinder. Restaurant Brands International posted second quarter revenue of $2.52 billion, up 4.5% year over year. Adjusted earnings per share came in at $1.07, up nearly 13% from the year before. The company returned $435 million to shareholders that quarter alone, split between dividends and share buybacks, and it's on track to repurchase roughly $500 million in stock for the full year. Global system-wide sales grew 6.4%. Organic operating income climbed 6.7%. By almost every measure that matters to a Wall Street analyst, RBI just had a genuinely strong quarter, and Popeyes was the one brand actively working against all of it, dragging system-wide sales at the chain into negative territory, down 3.3%, even as net restaurant growth ticked up a bare 0.3%. Picture a company posting double-digit earnings growth, while one of its 4 flagship brands is quietly bleeding out in the corner of the room, and you start to understand exactly how strange this earnings call actually was. Here's the part that makes this genuinely strange to watch unfold. Popeyes sits inside Restaurant Brands International, the same parent company that owns Burger King, Tim Hortons, and Firehouse Subs. And in that same Q2 2026 earnings report, Burger King posted 8.5% growth in U.S. comparable sales, its best U.S. same-store sales performance since the second quarter of 2023, and enough to outperform the entire burger fast food industry by more than 9 full percentage points. Firehouse Subs grew system-wide sales 7.5%. RBI's international business, the segment covering Burger King and Popeyes locations outside the U.S. and Canada, delivered its 21st consecutive quarter of positive same-store sales growth, up 5.5% for the quarter, with double-digit growth in markets like Germany, Spain, Brazil, China, South Korea, and Japan. Even Popeyes' own international business quietly outperformed its American counterpart. With Brazil posting strong comparable sales growth in the same quarter, the U.S. business was falling apart. 2 chains, 1 parent company, 1 earnings call, and one of them is flying while the other is still finding its footing. RBI's chairman Patrick Doyle called Burger King's turnaround still unfinished, saying there's meaningful runway left. Meanwhile, Popeyes CEO Josh Kobza told analysts the chicken chain's recovery is going, in his words, exactly as hoped, adding that while sales remained soft during the quarter, the company was encouraged by the sequential improvement it saw as the months went on. 2 very different sentences, describing 2 very different realities inside the exact same company. So how did Popeyes end up the underperformer in its own family? To understand that, you have to understand what's actually happening underneath the fast food chicken category right now. Because Popeyes isn't losing a fight against one rival. It's losing ground to almost the entire field at once. Chick-fil-A still dominates the category outright, commanding roughly half of all category spending in the chicken segment. That's not a typo, half. And even at the very top of the mountain, that giant is still growing, up 5.2% in 2025, just barely off the 5.4% pace it posted the year before. But the more alarming trend for Popeyes isn't the giant at the top, it's the challenger climbing up from below. Raising Cane's has nearly doubled its share of the chicken category, overtaking both Popeyes and KFC in the process. Cane's built an entire empire on a menu with almost nothing on it: chicken tenders, fries, Texas toast, and one sauce that people will genuinely argue about online. No confusion, no complexity, no 40 items competing for attention on a drive-thru board. Just one thing, done the same way, every single time. And customers rewarded that focus with real dollars. Then there's Wingstop, which grew sales 11% in 2025 after growing an eye-watering 36.8% the year before. even slowing down, that's a chain still expanding faster than almost anyone else at the table. KFC, meanwhile, had a genuinely rough year of its own, with sales down 6%. Proof that Popeyes isn't even the worst performing bird on the block. Compare all of that to Popeyes, whose total sales actually fell 0.5% in 2025, a full reversal from the 3.9% growth it posted in 2024. One year you're growing, the next year you're shrinking, and your competitors aren't shrinking with you, they're eating the difference. What makes this especially uncomfortable for Popeyes is that Cane's and Wingstop didn't win by out-advertising anyone. They won by refusing to compete on the same terms Popeyes was playing on. Cane's still, to this day, sells essentially one meal, chicken fingers and a handful of combinations, and has turned that narrowness into a cult-like consistency that customers can predict down to the last fry. Wingstop built its entire growth story around flavor variety within a single, simple product: wings, tossed in dozens of sauces without ever bloating the rest of the menu around it. Popeyes, by contrast, spent years trying to be a full-menu fried chicken destination, a biscuit shop, a seafood counter, and a rotating carousel of limited-time sandwiches all at once. When a customer has to think for more than a few seconds about what a brand actually stands for, that's usually a sign the brand has already lost the fight for their habit long before it shows up in a quarterly sales report. Before you can understand why any of that stings, you have to understand what Popeyes actually is underneath the corporate branding. This isn't a startup chasing its first good quarter. Popeyes traces back to 1972, when a 29-year-old high school dropout named Al Copeland opened a small fried chicken spot in Araby, Louisiana, just outside New Orleans. Originally called Chicken on the Run, it failed within months. Copeland reopened it under a new name inspired by the character Popeye Doyle from The French Connection, leaned into bold Cajun and Creole spice instead of copying the competition down the street, and spent the next 4 decades building it into one of the largest fried chicken chains on the planet. By 2017, Popeyes had grown to more than 2,600 restaurants across the U.S. and 25 other countries, enough scale that Restaurant Brands International paid one ball at $8 billion, $79 a share, to bring it into the same portfolio as Burger King and Tim Hortons. Today, that footprint has grown past 4,300 restaurants in more than 30 countries, folded into a parent company that operates more than 20,000 restaurants in over 100 countries worldwide. This is, in other words, a genuine American institution with more than 50 years of history behind it, not a fad brand that got lucky once. Which is exactly why watching it post 7 losing quarters out of 8, and watching one of its oldest franchise partners liquidate in bankruptcy court, hits differently than it would for some newer chain nobody's grandparents ever ate at. Here's the emotional core of this story, and it's not really about menus or marketing at all. It's about what happens to a brand's identity when it tries to be everything to everyone. Popeyes built its reputation on a single spicy chicken sandwich that broke the internet in 2019 and sparked what the industry still calls the chicken sandwich wars. That sandwich sold out nationwide in 2 weeks. It was, for one brief moment, the most talked about item in American fast food. But RBI itself has since admitted the years after that moment went sideways. The company's own language is blunt: an over-reliance on limited-time offers, an eroding value proposition, and a loss of focus on the chain's core menu. Translation, in plain English: Popeyes chased hype instead of protecting what made people love it in the first place. Every few weeks brought a new limited-time flavor, a new sauce, a new collaboration, and somewhere in that blur, the thing that actually built the brand: consistent, reliable, genuinely great fried chicken, got a little harder to find underneath all the noise. And while the chain was chasing headlines, the ground underneath it was cracking in a much more literal way. And this is where the story gets genuinely messy. In January 2026, Sailormen Incorporated, one of Popeyes' largest and longest-running franchise operators, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. To understand how big a deal that actually is, you need to understand what Sailormen was. This wasn't some over-leveraged operator that popped up chasing a trend. Sailormen was founded back in 1984 as an 11-unit Popeyes franchisee out of Miami. Over 3.5 decades, through acquisitions and steady development, it grew into one of the largest franchise portfolios in the entire Popeyes system. At one point operating restaurants across Illinois, Missouri, Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi in addition to its home turf. Between 2012 and 2018, the company made a deliberate strategic choice, selling off those out-of-state units to concentrate everything on Florida and Georgia, the 2 markets it knew best. By the time it filed for bankruptcy, Sailormen ran 136 Popeyes restaurants and employed more than 3,300 people. This was not a fringe player. This was, by any reasonable measure, one of the anchor tenants of the entire brand. So when a company with that kind of history and that kind of scale collapses, the reasons matter. Sailormen's own bankruptcy filing points to a mix of familiar post-pandemic pressures, rising inflation, higher borrowing costs, and declining customer traffic, but also to a specific chain of bad breaks. A 2023 deal to sell 16 of its Georgia restaurants to another operator, Tar Heels Spice, fell apart, and that failed transaction hurt the company's cash flow badly. A second attempt to sell 32 locations around Jacksonville never closed either. By December 2025, BMO Bank, acting as administrative agent for Sailormen's senior secured lenders, had filed a receivership complaint in New York, essentially threatening to seize control of the company outright. Filing for Chapter 11 5 weeks later was, according to Sailormen's own chief restructuring officer, a direct attempt to avoid exactly that outcome. Court filings put the company's total liabilities at more than $342 million against 2025 sales of roughly $233 million, and a net operating loss for that year of nearly $19 million. Read that again. This was a company doing well over $200 million in annual revenue, selling plenty of chicken to plenty of customers, and still losing money every single month under the weight of its own debt, its rent, and its labor costs. That's not a demand problem, that's a balance sheet problem, the kind that can sit quietly underneath a business for years before it finally breaks in public. The closures came in waves and they weren't clean. 17 restaurants shut down in January as the bankruptcy process began. A March court filing revealed 3 more had already been closed before the initial petition, all in Georgia. Popeyes' own U.S. and Canada president, Peter Perdue, pushed back hard on the idea that Sailormen's collapse said anything about the health of the broader system, telling franchisees in a note that a large majority of Sailormen's restaurants were, in his words, very profitable, in line with our system average, and some even above it, and that Sailormen's announcement did not reflect the healthy unit economics the rest of the franchise system was experiencing. That's the kind of statement a parent company only puts in writing when it's worried people are about to draw the wrong conclusion. By June, the auction process for the remaining locations had concluded. 97 of the original 136 restaurants found buyers, together selling for just under $16. $6 million, a strikingly small number for that many operating restaurants, which tells you almost everything about how distressed this sale actually was. 50 of those restaurants, spread across Tampa, Tallahassee, Pensacola, and Jacksonville, went to a new operator called Pulse Restaurant Group for $2.69 million. In one of the stranger footnotes of this entire saga, Pulse was founded by the same man who had run Sailormen into bankruptcy in the first place, David D'Amato, effectively buying back a slice of the empire he just lost. 23 Orlando area locations were slated for a buyer called RFI Ventures, though that deal later fell through, and the stores had to be re-auctioned, eventually landing with SBH Foods for $2.67 million in late July. 16 restaurants in the Miami area were bought directly by Popeyes corporate itself for $9.6 million. 5 locations near Savannah went to SBH Foods for $650,000, and 3 in West Palm Beach sold for just over $1 million. Everything left over, 52 restaurants that failed to attract a single buyer through the entire auction process, simply closed. Picture that for a second. Nearly 40 neighborhood Popeyes locations, places where people picked up dinner on a Tuesday night for decades, just gone. Their leases rejected in a bankruptcy court because keeping the lights on had become a net drain on the estate. Franchise bankruptcies happen across the industry constantly, and RBI was quick to point out this wasn't Popeyes itself going under. It was one operator's balance sheet collapsing under its own weight in a year. Circana data shows the broader fried chicken category actually grew traffic by roughly 3%. But optics matter in this business, and the optics of your largest, most tenured franchisee liquidating in the exact same year your parent company is publicly promising a turnaround are not optics any brand wants. So that's the wreckage. Now here's the part that actually explains the headline. Because while all of that was happening, Popeyes wasn't sitting still. It was quietly building the exact strategy that's now starting to bend the decline curve, and it's a strategy built entirely around one word the chain had apparently forgotten for a few years: value. In January 2026, Popeyes rolled out its $5 faves menu, 4 items, each priced at exactly $5, no combo tricks, no upsell games, 3 pieces of signature bone-in chicken, 3 chicken tenders, 2 chicken wraps, 2 regular sides. It ran through mid-February, then got extended through April, then came back again from July 13th through August 30th, with a 5th option added, 8 pieces of butterfly shrimp, seasoned in the same Louisiana spice blend as everything else on the menu. This wasn't a downsized, cheapened version of Popeyes food built to hit a price point. The chain was explicit about that. The same 12-hour marinade, the same hand-battered preparation, the same product people already loved, just priced like the company actually wanted you to walk through the door. The fact that RBI brought the promotion back a third time, rather than quietly letting it expire the way most fast food chains do, with underperforming limited-time deals, tells you the internal sales data was strong enough to justify committing real marketing dollars to it twice more. Then in May, Popeyes made a much quieter but strategically sharper move. It took its chicken wraps, which had been a limited-time item, and made them permanent, priced at $3.99. That number matters because McDonald's had already made its own chicken wraps permanent the year before at $2.99. Popeyes was openly stepping into a price fight against the largest fast food company on earth, $1 higher, betting that the difference in quality would justify the difference in price. It's a small menu item, but it's a genuinely aggressive statement. Popeyes wasn't retreating from competition. It was picking a specific fight it thought it could win. In a segment of the industry where nearly every major chain, from Wendy's to Taco Bell to McDonald's itself, has spent the last 2 years scrambling to convince increasingly price-sensitive customers that fast food is still worth the trip. Value menus used to be the exception in this industry. The thing chains rolled out quietly during a recession and quietly retired once traffic recovered. Now they're closer to table stakes. Every major chain has some version of a bundled, sub-$8 deal running at all times because the customer who used to treat a drive-through meal as an easy, guilt-free splurge now cross-shops it against cooking at home before they ever pull into the lot. Popeyes betting an entire promotional calendar on $5 pricing isn't an isolated experiment. It's the company finally catching up to where the rest of the category already was. And then there was the move nobody expected from a Louisiana fried chicken brand at all. In April 2026, Popeyes launched its first-ever anime collaboration, partnering with Toei Animation on a Popeyes BX One Piece promotion across the US and Canada. This wasn't a logo slapped on a cup. The menu itself was built around the show. A Luffy bento bundle, priced at $13.99, packaged 2 pieces of Popeyes' signature chicken with mac and cheese, a Gum Gum fruit lemonade named after the manga's central power system, and a Chopper's cupcake, alongside a standalone Luffy bento box at $7.99 for anyone who just wanted the food without the extras. On launch day, Popeyes gave away a limited run of official one-piece bento boxes to the first 200 customers at 6 flagship locations across the country, and 2 days later opened an online shop selling branded keychains, t-shirts, and collectible boxes tied to the campaign. Popeyes' chief marketing officer, Matt Rubin, framed it as building the kind of meal you'd want before setting sail for the Grand Line. On paper, it sounds almost like a punchline. In practice, it's a calculated bet on a franchise that has generated more than $600 million in merchandise and licensing sales worldwide, and comes with one of the most devoted, most online fan bases in entertainment, the exact kind of younger, digitally native audience that chains like Wingstop and Raising Cane's have been courting far more effectively than Popeyes has in recent years. If Cane's built loyalty through relentless focus and Wingstop built it through partnerships like its NBA sponsorship, Popeyes is trying to build relevance the fastest way it knows how, by showing up inside a fandom that already has millions of people paying obsessive attention. Here's where the story pivots from defense to something closer to ambition. Because at the exact moment Popeyes was fighting to stop the bleeding at home, it was also announcing one of the most aggressive international growth plans in the brand's history. In October 2025, Popeyes signed development agreements with 4 regional franchise groups to build more than 300 new restaurants across Mexico over the next decade, a country where the chain currently operates just 42 locations. That's not a modest bolt-on. That's roughly a 7-fold expansion in a single market, and Mexico isn't even the biggest number on the table. Popeyes has also laid out plans to open 1,700 restaurants in China over the next 10 years, alongside new pushes into Italy, the Czech Republic, Costa Rica, South Korea, and Poland. None of this is happening in isolation from the rest of RBI's playbook either. The company has said it's targeting 5% net restaurant growth across its entire portfolio by 2028, and it's actively winding down its company-operated restaurant holdings segment, planning to refranchise a few hundred locations this year, and the rest by 2027, freeing up capital and management attention specifically to pour into growth markets, like these instead of propping up owned stores. It's worth noticing what these particular target markets have in common too. Mexico, China, Costa Rica, Poland, the Czech Republic. None of them come with 39 recently shuttered locations attached to their name. None of them have a Sailor Men-sized bankruptcy sitting in the recent headlines, and none of them have spent the last 2 years watching Raising Cane's and Chick-fil-A quietly steal market share right out from under them. Expanding into a market with zero baggage is, in a very real sense, easier than fixing the one you already have. It's just a much slower way to prove the brand itself still works. Sit with that contrast for a second, because it's the strangest part of this entire story. A company whose domestic same-store sales have fallen in 7 of the last 8 quarters, whose largest U.S. franchisee just spent 2026 liquidating in bankruptcy court, is simultaneously signing decade-long commitments to build thousands of new restaurants overseas. Is that confidence, or is that a company betting its future growth somewhere its current problems haven't caught up with it yet? Probably both. International markets for Popeyes have been performing more strongly than the U.S. business, and RBI has leaned into that pattern across its entire portfolio, not just Popeyes. When your home market gets crowded and your competitors start eating your lunch, you go find a market where you're still the exciting new option instead of the tired incumbent. Now here's the honest complication in all of this, the part that keeps this from being a clean redemption arc. The entire chicken category that Popeyes competes in is slowing down, for everyone, not just Popeyes. Sales growth across the segment has decelerated for 2 straight years running. Even Chick-fil-A, the undisputed heavyweight sitting on roughly half the category's spending, saw its growth ease slightly, up 5.2% in 2025 compared to 5.4% the year before. KFC had a genuinely rough year, sales down 4.6%. Wingstop is still growing, but at 11%, a fraction of the 36.8% pace it posted the year before. The market itself is telling every chicken brand the same thing. The easy growth years are over, and now it's a fight over who can defend their existing customers instead of just adding new ones. Popeyes isn't failing in isolation. It's failing inside a category where standing still is no longer an option for anyone, and where a handful of aggressive, narrowly focused challengers are proving that discipline beats novelty. That's really the lesson sitting underneath this entire announcement, and it's bigger than one chicken sandwich chain. For years, the winning strategy in fast food looked like constant reinvention. New flavors, new collaborations, new limited-time drops designed to trend on social media for 2 weeks and then disappear. Popeyes rode that formula about as far as it could go, and then watched Raising Cane's and Chick-fil-A prove that the opposite formula, radical consistency and a menu you could recite from memory, was actually what built long-term loyalty. Now Popeyes is trying to hold both approaches at once, the disciplined value platform of the $5 faves menu and the permanent wraps war, running alongside the attention-chasing instincts of an anime collaboration, all while the company bets hundreds of millions of dollars on growth in markets where none of that domestic baggage exists yet. It's a company essentially running 2 different playbooks simultaneously, hoping the boring one fixes the balance sheet, while the flashy one buys back some cultural relevance, and betting that neither one undermines the other in the process. Whether that combination actually works is still an open question, and RBI itself isn't pretending otherwise. Kobza told analysts he expects Popeyes to return to positive comparable sales growth in the second half of 2026, which means the real verdict on this turnaround lands sometime around the next earnings call, currently scheduled for the morning of October 29th. Not this one. What we know for certain right now is this: the bleeding has slowed, not stopped. The value platform is resonating enough that RBI is doubling down on it, instead of quietly retiring it the way brands usually do with underperforming promotions. The international expansion is real money, real signed agreements, not just a slide in an investor deck, and the rest of the company, Burger King's turnaround, Tim Hortons and International's 21 consecutive quarters of growth, the buybacks, the dividend, the balance sheet, is healthy enough to absorb Popeyes' underperformance for now, without anyone at headquarters panicking about it in public. So here's where this actually leaves us. 54 years after a failed chicken stand in a New Orleans suburb turned into one of the most recognizable fried chicken brands on earth, the company is being forced to relearn a lesson its founder understood instinctively. A strong flavor profile and a loud marketing calendar can carry a brand for a while, but they can't substitute forever for a menu people trust and a price they don't have to think twice about. Popeyes isn't the villain of this story, and it isn't the hero either. It's a legacy brand caught in the exact moment every fast food chain eventually faces. The choice between chasing the next viral moment or rebuilding the boring, unglamorous fundamentals that made people trust you in the first place. The company that broke the internet with one sandwich in 2019 spent the years since figuring out that virality doesn't pay the rent on 39 restaurants in Florida and Georgia or keep a 35-year-old franchise empire out of bankruptcy court. Value does, consistency does, and right now Popeyes is betting its next decade on relearning that lesson at home, in a category that stopped handing out easy growth to anyone while it's still simple enough to teach for the first time abroad, in markets where the Popeyes name hasn't been through any of this yet.